He had stopped barking long ago. Not because he was calm, but because hope had died inside him. Tomorrow, a needle would end what the world had already thrown away. But that night, someone saw his photo, and something in his eyes made her heart ache. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his past. But what she did next changed both of their lives forever. The Dog Who Waited in Silence. Late autumn had settled over the town of Fairbrook, Montana, with a stubborn chill that clung to the air like a memory refusing to fade. The sky was painted a dull pewter, and thin clouds stretched like tired hands across the horizon. Wind moved through the branches of bare cottonwoods that lined the narrow two-lane road leading toward the Fairbrook County Animal Shelter Squat, aging building made of brown cinder block, tucked between a shuttered lumber yard and an abandoned diner. It smelled of bleach, damp fur, and quiet endings. Inside kennel number 12, Cooper lay curled in a tight ball. A 6-year-old Labrador retriever, yellow-coated with a patch of gray creeping along his muzzle, he was once the kind of dog families fought over, bouncy, loyal, full of the kind of sunshine that Labradors seemed born with. But now, his coat had lost its shine. His body bore the quiet evidence of neglect, a healing scar on his hind leg, a dullness in the eyes that once danced. His tail no longer wagged. Cooper no longer barked. That had stopped weeks ago. Cooper wasn't always this way. Once, he'd lived in a backyard with a little girl who painted his nails pink and read him stories under a tree. But that life had slipped away, replaced by a series of concrete floors, cold stares, and hands that only took. Somewhere along the line, Cooper learned that hope meant pain, and love meant abandonment. The shelter workers had labeled him difficult. He flinched at sudden movements, growled when cornered, and refused to eat when strangers were near. On paper, he was marked as behavioral risk, unsuitable for adoption. Sarah Penner, the shelter's lead technician, walked past the kennel slowly, clipboard in hand. A tall, lean woman in her early 50s, Sarah had weathered the worst of small-town animal control hoarders, cruelty cases, the endless stream of abandoned pets after every summer ended. Her graying brown hair was always pulled into a low ponytail, and her eyes, though tired, still held kindness. She had a soft spot for the broken ones. But years of underfunding and overpopulation had forced her to make hard choices, choices that left bruises on her soul. As she paused by Cooper's kennel, she knelt carefully, not too close. "You were somebody's good boy once," she said softly. Cooper didn't lift his head. Only his ears flicked. A quiet recognition, but no movement. Sarah's voice tightened. "I'm sorry, Coop. I pushed your date as far as I could." The shelter was full again. A batch of 12 dogs had come in last week after a backyard breeder in the county got raided. The math never added up. Cooper had been here longer than any of them. No one asked about him anymore. Even volunteers had stopped pausing at his cage. She rose slowly and made a small note on the clipboard. "Final notice. Euthanized by Friday. Tomorrow." Outside, wind pressed against the building, whistling through gaps in the frame. Inside, the other dogs barked and howled high-pitched, desperate calls that bounced off walls and doors. But not Cooper. He lay in silence, not asleep, not awake, just waiting. That night, the shelter lights dimmed at 9 p.m. as always. Sarah did one last walkthrough before leaving. She stopped again at Kennel 12, peering inside. Still no movement. Then, just as she turned to leave, she heard a sound so faint she almost missed it. A soft whimper, barely more than a breath. Not a cry for help, not a demand, just a sound. The sound a soul makes when it finally lets go. She turned back, staring at Cooper. His eyes met hers for the briefest second, and something shifted no tail wag, no rise to his feet. But in that one look, there was the hollow echo of something once alive, now nearly gone. Sarah stood frozen, then whispered, "I'm sorry, buddy." She turned off the lights. The kennel returned to darkness. Outside, frost coated the grass. A low fog crept over the town of Fairbrook like a funeral shroud. And in the far end of the shelter, where the heat barely reached, a Labrador who had stopped believing in miracles let out one final, fragile sigh, half breath, half prayer into the silence. Snow was falling again in Fairbrook, thick and slow like it had all the time in the world to cover up everything that hurt. The streets were quiet, blanketed in white, and the streetlights flickered gently in the cold. Somewhere beyond the sleepy homes and darkened windows, a woman named Hannah Miles sat in her modest second-floor apartment, staring blankly at her laptop screen. Hannah was 32. With auburn hair she always kept tucked into a low bun. She was neither tall nor short, just quietly present. The kind of woman who once smiled easily, but now did so rarely, as if each one had to be earned. Her eyes, a soft green, had dimmed over the past 2 years since the accident. 2 winters ago, her 5-year-old son Eli had been struck by a drunk driver while chasing his toy car across a frozen sidewalk. Hannah had been right there just a few steps away, calling his name. And yet too far, too late. Since then, her life had collapsed inward. She worked night shifts as a trauma nurse at Fairbrook Medical Center, a job that kept her hands busy and her thoughts numbed. She had sold their house and moved into the smaller apartment, unable to pass Eli's empty bedroom without breaking. She had told herself she would never again open her heart to anything fragile, not a child, not even a plant, not even a pet. But tonight, something shifted. Scrolling mindlessly through her phone, Hannah's thumb paused over a photo low resolution, dimly lit but striking, a yellow Labrador, curled in a corner of a kennel. His head was down, his body thin, but it was the eyes that held her, eyes that didn't plead, didn't hope, just watched, quietly. The post was from Fairbrook County Animal Shelter, time-stamped just hours ago. The caption beneath the photo read, "Cooper, 6 years old, scheduled for euthanasia tomorrow morning, needs a home tonight." Hannah sat motionless, her thumb hovering over the image. Her mind protested, "You don't need this. You've barely held yourself together." But her heart whispered something else. Something small, quiet and aching. Her fingers moved before her mind had fully agreed. She opened the shelter's website, found the emergency line, and called. No answer. She called again. Nothing. Finally, on the 3rd ring, someone picked up. "This is Fairbrook Shelter, emergency line," said a woman, her voice low and a little wary. It was Leanne Boyd, the shelter's part-time overnight assistant. A retired schoolteacher, Leanne was in her 60s, with a kind, grainy voice and a habit of humming when nervous. "I saw the post about Cooper," Hannah said. "The Labrador. I want to adopt him, tonight." There was silence on the line. "He's scheduled," Leanne began, hesitant. "I know," Hannah cut in, "but I need to see him. Please, I'm 5 minutes away." Leanne sighed. "Okay, come to the side gate. I'll be waiting." Hannah didn't grab a coat. She just shoved her feet into boots, threw on the same gray hoodie she wore every night at home, and grabbed her keys. The snow had picked up, swirling like ghosts as she drove. The town passed in a blur, closed diners, shuttered storefronts, the empty church parking lot. By the time she pulled up outside the shelter, her windshield was nearly white with frost. Leanne was already standing under the side awning, bundled in a heavy navy parka, her silver hair escaping from her knit hat in wisps. "You really came," Leanne said, a little stunned. "I had to," Hannah replied. "Where is he?" Without another word, Leanne led her through the side door and down the hall to Kennel 12. The other dogs barked as they passed high-pitched and desperate, but Cooper didn't move. He was still curled in the same position, like part of the concrete. Hannah approached slowly, her heart pounding. The smell of antiseptic and old fur filled the air. She knelt near the kennel gate. Cooper didn't lift his head. Then Hannah whispered, almost to herself, "I'm here because of your eyes." Leanne looked at her, startled by the quiet intensity in her voice. "He hasn't responded to anyone in weeks." Hannah didn't look away. "I don't need him to respond. I just need him to know I'm not here to take anything. I'm here to give." Leanne nodded after a long pause. "Give me a few minutes to get the paperwork." While she walked off, Hannah remained by the kennel, not speaking, just watching. Eventually, Cooper blinked. Once, slowly. By the time Leanne returned, leash in hand, Hannah had already unclipped the gate latch. "Wait," Leanne started. But Hannah was already kneeling inside the kennel, her palm open on the ground, giving Cooper space. "Only if he wants to come," she said softly. And then it happened. Barely perceptible, Cooper lifted his head, just an inch. His nose twitched once, then again. And without a sound, he shifted forward. Not much. Just enough to press his forehead into Hannah's palm. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them, not from pity, but from recognition, the way broken souls could sense each other, even through silence. The drive from the shelter to Hannah's home was wrapped in silence, broken only by the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers against snow and the occasional sigh of the engine struggling against the icy road. Cooper lay in the back seat on a folded quilt Hannah had thrown over the leather. He didn't move, didn't whine, just stared out the window as if expecting the world to vanish any second. The light from passing street lamps danced across his pale yellow coat, highlighting the faint scar on his rear leg and the streaks of gray that aged his face beyond 6 years. Hannah's small home stood at the end of a narrow cul-de-sac on the northern edge of Fairbrook, nestled beside a line of bare oaks. The house, once painted sky blue, had faded with time and Montana winters, its porch light flickering in defiance of the cold. It was quiet, too quiet, as if the walls themselves remembered laughter once filled the rooms, and were still waiting for it to return. She opened the car door slowly, careful not to startle Cooper. He stayed curled until she whispered, "It's okay, boy. We're home now." The word home hung heavy in the air. Hannah stepped back and gave him space. After a pause, Cooper uncurled, climbed out, and followed her to the front door with uncertain, low steps. His movements were slow, his head lowered, eyes scanning everything like it might suddenly strike him. When they stepped inside, warmth greeted them. Hannah had left the heat running, but there was no other sign of life. Just a dog bed near the window, 2 metal bowls set in the kitchen corner, and a small table with framed photographs. Cooper walked cautiously, pausing in each doorway before stepping in. He didn't bark or sniff excitedly like most dogs might. He simply moved like a shadow in a house that didn't yet feel real. That night, Hannah didn't try to touch him. She set a bowl of kibble and water down, changed into pajamas, and made a spot for herself on the floor across the room from where Cooper had settled curled tight in the farthest corner of the living room. Beside a shelf of unopened books and dusty candles, she pulled a thick quilt around her shoulders and began to speak, her voice soft, almost whispering. "My son's name was Eli," she said, not expecting a reaction. "He would have liked you. He used to run around the backyard pretending to be a superhero. One time he tried to make a cape for a squirrel. That didn't end well." Cooper didn't move, but she kept talking. Every night, after every shift at the hospital, she told him about the day Eli was born, how he used to sleep on her chest, how his giggle had a hiccup in it. She didn't know why she shared these memories with a dog who barely acknowledged her. Maybe it was because Cooper didn't look away, Or maybe it was because she knew that deep silence understood deep pain. Days passed. Cooper didn't eat at first, only sipping water when no one was watching. He refused the dog bed, instead curling into the same cold patch near the door. Hannah respected his space. She didn't coax or bribe him. She simply stayed nearby, present. She came home from long shifts smelling of antiseptic and weariness, kicked off her shoes, and read books aloud into the quiet. She turned on soft jazz in the evenings, the kind without words, and sometimes left the bedroom door open in case he decided to move closer. The neighbors had started to notice the new arrival. One morning, as Hannah was walking to her car, Mrs. Judith Ellerby, the woman who lived across the street, waved from her porch. She was in her late 60s, a widow with a flock of indoor cats and a fondness for peach-colored lipstick. "He looks gentle," Judith said, squinting toward the window where Cooper sat watching. "Like he's been through something but still has a bit of spark left." Hannah offered a tired smile. "He's quiet, but I think he's listening." One night, as snow fell again thicker this time, Hannah came home and sat cross-legged near the fireplace with a mug of tea and the same old book in her lap. Cooper lay nearby, awake but unmoving. After a while, she reached for a frame on the nearby shelf. The photo was worn, its colors soft with age. In it, Eli stood barefoot in the grass, his arms flung around a large stuffed dinosaur. His grin was wild and alive. Hannah held the frame with both hands, her thumb brushing the edge. "I don't look at this much," she said, her voice catching. "But sometimes I feel like I need to remember he was real, not just something I dreamed." A long pause. And then a sound. Soft, careful. Cooper shifted. He stood slowly, legs stiff from days of tension. Step by step, he crossed the room and sat beside her. Not touching, just close enough for his breath to warm her sleeve. Then he leaned in and gently rested his head in her lap. Hannah froze, tears forming before she could stop them. Her hand hovered uncertainly, then moved to his back. His fur was warm, coarse, but warm. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Two broken beings sat in a quiet house, listening to the hum of wind against the windows, and found something like peace in the silence. It was a Thursday night in Fairbrook, the kind where the wind scratched against the windows and the sky threatened snow but never followed through. Hannah was curled on the couch with a wool blanket and a mug of chamomile tea. Cooper lay at her feet, his body finally at ease in the flickering glow of the fireplace. The living room was quiet but no longer heavy. The air carried a stillness that felt earned rather than imposed, like a room that had stopped holding its breath. The clock read 10:47 p.m. when the knock came. It was sharp. 3 raps. Not forceful but deliberate. Hannah sat upright, her mug trembling slightly in her hand. Cooper's ears perked instantly. He stood, hackles rising along his back, tail rigid. Then, for the first time since coming home with her, Cooper barked. It wasn't frantic or panicked. It was deep, guttural, protective, a sound that came from somewhere old and raw. Hannah's heart pounded. She rose slowly, setting the mug down on the coffee table. "It's okay," she whispered, more to herself than to Cooper. The knock came again, louder this time. She moved to the window, peering through the side of the curtain. A man stood on the porch, not moving, not knocking again, just standing. He wore a dark green jacket, the kind with too many pockets, and a baseball cap pulled low. She couldn't see his face, but something about his stance too calm, too patient sent a chill up her spine. Hannah stepped back and reached for her phone. She dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "My name is Hannah Miles," she whispered. "There's a man outside my house. He's not saying anything. He's just watching." The dispatcher stayed calm. "Is your door locked?" "Yes." "An officer is on the way. Stay on the line." Before she could answer, Cooper let out another bark sharper this time, as he moved toward the front door, body rigid with alertness. The man didn't leave. He stood like a statue beneath the porch light. Then, finally, he turned and walked away calmly, like he had all the time in the world. Hannah watched from the window as he disappeared down the street, swallowed by the shadows. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights bathed the snow-dusted lawn in color. A sheriff's department vehicle pulled up, and a tall man stepped out. Sheriff Tom Benson, in his late 50s, broad-shouldered with thinning hair and a weathered face that spoke of too many sleepless nights. His uniform was clean but worn at the seams, his brown eyes steady and quiet. Hannah opened the door only when he knocked and called her name. "Ma'am," he said with a nod, "I'm Sheriff Benson. You all right?" She nodded but didn't trust her voice. "Tell me what happened." Inside, Cooper stood close by her side, unmoving. Sheriff Benson noticed. "That your dog?" "Yes. His name's Cooper." The sheriff's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Mind if I take a closer look?" Hannah hesitated, then nodded. Sheriff Benson crouched slowly, extending a hand. "Hey there, boy," he said gently. "Ain't gonna hurt you." Cooper didn't growl, but he didn't move either. His gaze was fixed and guarded. "Where'd you get him?" the sheriff asked. "I adopted him from the Fairbrook shelter last week," Hannah said. "He was about to be euthanized. They said he had behavioral issues." The sheriff rose, rubbing the back of his neck. "You say a man was watching the house? Describe him." She did her best dark green jacket, baseball cap, quiet demeanor. Sheriff Benson frowned, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "You said the dog's name is Cooper, right?" "Yes." "Mind if I run his shelter records, just to be sure we're not missing anything?" Hannah agreed. The sheriff stepped aside to make a call from his cruiser. 15 minutes later he returned. "There's something you should know," he began, his voice low. "Cooper came from a seizure case 6 months ago. He and several other dogs were rescued from a training facility outside of Bozeman. It was part of an illegal dogfighting operation." Hannah felt her stomach drop. "We couldn't get much out of the guy who ran it. Name was Darrell Reese, 42, known troublemaker, in and out of jail for years. Cooper was one of the older dogs. Had scars, flinched at every sound. We figured he was a bait dog, not a fighter. That's why he's so skittish." "Is he dangerous?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sheriff Benson shook his head. "Not from what we saw, and not from what I see right now. He's protecting you. That bark tonight, that wasn't a dog looking for a fight. That was a dog standing his ground." "What about the man outside?" she asked. "We can't confirm it was Reese," the sheriff replied. "But he got out 2 weeks ago, early release, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was trying to find some of the dogs." Hannah's pulse quickened. Why would he want Cooper back? Could be revenge, could be pride. These men see dogs like Cooper as property, not living things. The words left a bitter taste in her mouth. "I'll have a patrol swing by every night for a while," Benson added, "and I suggest you keep the doors locked. But you're not alone in this. I'll make sure you're safe." He glanced again at Cooper. "And it looks like he will too." Hannah nodded, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. Cooper stood tall now, chest lifted, eyes calm but watchful. A silent guardian. When the sheriff left, she sat beside Cooper on the floor, her hand resting on his shoulder. "I don't care what he thinks you were," she whispered. "You're not a victim. You're not broken. You're mine." Cooper leaned gently into her side. For the first time since the man appeared on the porch, Hannah exhaled. And for the first time in his new home, Cooper didn't return to his corner when the house went dark. He stayed by her door. The morning light slipped gently through the lace curtains, casting dappled patterns across the hardwood floor. It was one of those rare Montana mornings in early spring where the sky held the color of Promesa pale, peach-tinted blue with no hint of storm. Outside, snow still lingered in patches, but birdsong had begun to return to the branches, and the air carried something softer than cold: renewal. Hannah stood barefoot in the kitchen, stirring cream into her coffee, eyes still heavy from the night shift. Her thoughts were still tangled with what-ifs. What if that man came back? What if the sheriff's patrol wasn't enough? What if Cooper could never fully feel safe? But when she turned toward the living room, those thoughts vanished, because there he was. Cooper was walking across the room toward her, not cautiously, not stiffly, but with calm purpose, and in his mouth was something she hadn't seen in over a year: a plush blue dinosaur toy, Eli's toy. Her breath caught. She hadn't even known it was still in the house. The last time she remembered holding it was in the hospital, pressing it to her chest like it could somehow bring her son back. She had tucked it deep in the bottom of a storage chest. She never meant for Cooper to find it, but he had. And now, gently, he placed it at her feet and looked up. She knelt slowly, her fingers trembling as she reached for the toy. Cooper didn't flinch. He sat, his tail thumping faintly against the rug. There was no fear in his eyes, Todo, only quiet offering, quiet understanding. Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks before she could stop them. She buried her face in the soft, faded fabric of the dinosaur, then looked at Cooper through blurred vision. "You really found it," she whispered. "You really see me, don't you?" That was the moment everything changed. Over the next few weeks, something bloomed between them, something both had forgotten was possible. They began each day with a walk through the woods that bordered the back of Hannah's property. Cooper would trot beside her, sniffing pine needles and frozen dirt, ears perked as if memorizing the world. Hannah started talking to him again, not out of grief this time, but habit, joyful habit. Cooper took to these walks with a quiet enthusiasm. His gait grew looser, more fluid, his tail higher. Occasionally, he'd chase the occasional squirrel with a bounce in his step. And once, while crossing a small stream, he leaped clean over the rocks and landed with a splash. Hannah laughed a real laugh. She hadn't heard it in so long. It startled her. Music returned to the house. Hannah began to cook again, experimenting with recipes she had long since abandoned. Cooper would lay near the kitchen island, always close but never underfoot. He had grown into the home like he'd always been meant to live there. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the windows and a pot of soup simmered on the stove, Hannah received a call. It was Sheriff Benson. "Good news," he said with a smile in his voice. "We got Reese. Turns out a neighbor caught him on their trail cam trying to break into a storage, shed same jacket, same truck. And we ran the image through the system. He matches the one from your porch. He's back in custody." Relief flooded her. But there was more. The judge ordered his parole revoked. "That means he's going away for a while. You and Cooper won't have to worry anymore." Hannah thanked him, voice thick with emotion. Later that week, Dr. Meredith Clark, the head of the behavioral therapy program at Fairbrook Medical Center, came to visit. In her late 40s, Dr. Clark was a woman with a stern posture and a warm heart salt and pepper hair always tied in a bun, glasses perched halfway down her nose. She had heard about Cooper from Sheriff Benson, and after watching him for an hour how he lay still beside Hannah, how he responded calmly to new voice-esh, made a gentle suggestion. "Have you ever considered therapy certification?" she asked. "For Cooper?" Hannah blinked. Dr. Clark nodded. "There's something about him, a groundedness, the kind people need when their world is falling apart." Hannah hadn't thought about it before, but now she couldn't unthink it. Over the next 2 months, Cooper and Hannah trained together. They visited the local nursing home, where Cooper sat quietly while elderly hands stroked his fur. They went to children's wards, where he lay beside kids with IVs and listened to picture books read in trembling voices. and Hannah watched him, her dog, her shadow, her survivor become something more. Eventually, the hospital approved his full certification. Cooper, once labeled dangerous, was now a registered therapy dog. On the day he received his official tag, Hannah held it between her fingers and smiled. It read, Cooper, Hope Companion. That night, Cooper curled by the window in his usual spot, the setting sun spilling golden light across his back. His eyes were closed, his breathing soft and even. Hannah stood nearby, a blanket over her shoulders. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at him, at the peace he carried now, at the light he no longer feared. Then she whispered, barely audible, "We waited a long time, didn't we, Cooper?" He didn't open his eyes, but his tail thumped once against the floor, as if to say, "I know." And outside, the wind passed quietly through the trees, no longer howling, just moving like a life that had found its rhythm again.